I have been sharing my story with friends in hopes they may have answers, but even those who have grown up around here cannot understand what I observed. I am not a believer in religion or anything else. Thus, the thought that I would witness anything that goes against reality worries me somewhat, and I cannot pretend that I feel a little shook to my core. About 2 months ago, practically to the date, I was sitting in my car, following a shift at a gas station. This was, incidentally, in eastern Arizona. It was little after midnight, as I was smoking a cigarette in my car, about to text my girlfriend to let her know I was on my way to her place. It first made me sit up in my seat, try to squint closer, change my eyes to more of the darkness, and then see what it was I was looking at. After only a few seconds, I could then clearly see that this was truly someone who seemed to be surrounded in animal pelts or animal furs. They seemed to be trying to be covert, almost as if they were slipping around, trying not to be observed. My car wasn't on at the moment, hence even if they happened to glance over at me, they wouldn't know that I was even in the car. This individual waited for some time crouching behind a big sagebrush. I stayed observing, wondering what this person was doing. One of the biggest coyotes I have ever seen then came from behind the sagebrush and disappeared into the darkness. That was quite strange. I have no idea why someone would be out here in the middle of the desert at night, wrapped in animal hair, and then all of a sudden a coyote appears. It sounded quite eerie. I know that shouldn't happen, and I'm speaking Stephen King levels of weird. Stephen King's degrees of eerie are unacceptable, and I know this too. Though it wasn't a full moon into coyotes, I still don't want to believe in humans changing under the moon. I can't ignore what I observed. Though I saw them not really change, it's strange that they would walk behind a bush. And the next thing you know, a coyote shows up. Still, I am aware of. It sounds ridiculous and like it created a bad narrative, but that is what I observed. Later, I told my partner I was pre-teen on my way in the early 1980s. Back when I was a youngster in the early 1980s, visiting some distant family I had never met in New Mexico. Since I suppose the idea of a village doesn't really exist in America, they weren't settled like in Scotland. They lived in a small hamlet with a close-knit community, or what I would want to term a village. Still, I felt it was very awesome to be able to investigate a brand new culture I had never encountered before. Being from Pittsburgh meant that everything I knew was essentially contrary. Much more, silence, tranquility, friendliness, and so on. But a few hours after my parents and I arrived, our relatives cautioned us of what tormented the area late at night. Apparently, nobody in town allowed their pets out after dark or left after dark, as these creatures known as skinwalkers would prowl the streets and possess everyone they could come across. These entities supposedly did not really show up very often, a few times a year at least. When they visited, though, it was erratic and random, and nobody was ready to chance running across them. One night, allegedly, one of the townsmen attempted to shoot a skinwalker with his rifle. The bullet was reflected off of it and straight back into him, directly through his heart. The people understood they couldn't fight back after that evening, hence they were better off being kept within. I reasoned that this was all a complex old wives' tale, used on children from bygone eras to prevent them from straying out. And finally, the whole neighborhood came around with time. Besides, given Pittsburgh, I reasoned, by then I had encountered individuals far more terrifying than anyone I might come across here. Though I doubted I would, and I didn't believe in the story anyhow. I mean, being 12 years old, I deliberately slipped out the rear door that night simply to see if I would come across one of these things. I realized I was incorrect as I passed the little library in the town and noticed something strange a few yards away. Across from me was a lanky, hunched-over figure in what appeared to be a person, but with hands and feet wrapped in what looked to be bandages, giving the outward aspect of a coyote. Screaming, I ran from our lives while the skinwalker bounded after me. quiet, except for the padding of their feet on the ground below them. I noticed someone's door open, and an elderly lady called at me to enter. Just as this thing, a skinwalker, made their way onto the porch, I almost flew inside and she shut and locked it. Frustrated, it hammered at the door and yelled grunts and shouts of wrath before the noises stopped a few minutes later. The noises sounded to be a combination between someone screaming and a coyote yelp. It was bad. The woman asked me who I was and what I was doing that night after we both sighed with relief. I wanted to find out whether so-called skinwalkers were real, so I just told her I was here seeing family. She said that I was very stupid to entice fate like that. If you want them to show up and desire them, they will make sure they are there. She stated I had been caught. The witch would have taken me far away, so it wouldn't have mattered how loud I yelled. Nobody would have heard me. But from there, it would have skinned me alive and passed for me whenever it so suited. Fortunately for me, she decided it unsafe for me to return out. Therefore, she made me spend the evening on her couch. I was reunited with my family in the morning. After my parents saw what had happened, they wanted to leave, but our relatives persuaded them it would be some time before any skinwalkers returned. Nothing happened. Few days after we returned home, I had not visited that small town, Ballen, since it's so small in over 40 years, yet that experience is sufficient to make me hesitate before leaving the house late. If you're interested in the location, this was an actual hole in the wall in Folsom Community in New Mexico. There is a reason this community is named as such. There isn't much there, but even less so in the 80s. The population is really modest. Since I haven't visited there in a long time, I have no idea what it looks like anymore. And still, I try and keep well away from anywhere surrounding there. You most likely come across some stories that simply seem too outlandish to be real. Mine will sound the same, therefore I'm sorry in advance, but I worked a few months at Skinwalker Ranch in northern Utah. Certainly, that ranch, among the armed guard, were myself. I chose to start individually exploring the unknown, since the Army let me go and I had nowhere to know what to do with myself. I hired hoping to witness more in line with UFO and sky phenomenon. Sure enough, I did. But what I most noticed was more earthy, and that was somehow all the more horrible. They assigned me patrol at the main gate on the outside. It was my responsibility to light someone without clearance who touched the gate. Out there in the sun, where the heat will play tricks on you, a man might become rather self-conscious. One particularly hot afternoon, 3 hours into my shift, I noticed the shade of a tree change. It ran counter to the natural dappled sunlight the movement of leaves generated. Not sure. The whole trunk's and branches' shadow was moving. I began to consider someone on the ground concealed in the long brush. I thus waved my rifle to make it abundantly evident that I was armed, so avoiding any claim that they were unaware of the kind of situation they were in. When the shadow rose up, I knew I had answered the correct call. My initial impression was the eyes. They felt to me as two white stones burning into me. They rendered me vulnerable and powerless. If I say so myself, it was a somewhat unusual feeling, as generally I am fearless in confrontation. Aiming my weapon at the figure, I yelled at them to turn around and go. Apart from the anxiety I was already experiencing, the emotions the stare brought about became almost tangible, pushing me back. This shape changed like a mass of oil before my nerves could cause me to fire the trigger. It licked its lips to display me white teeth matching its eyes. Then it shot off with speed that transcends description. Though utterly dark, the form it adopted reminded me of a puma combined with a coyote. Beyond words is what it is. Claiming to have seen a skinwalker on Skinwalker Ranch would be far too handy. that's what everyone wants me to say, or that it was a flying saucer. Yet, that was no flying saucer or alien. Exists anything else that seems like a person assuming the form of an animal? Looking back, it seemed so anticlimactic, yet at that moment, it really got under my skin. No headpiece, no macabre necklace of body parts, no animal pelts. Yet should a skinwalker's magic truly degrade them, may it make sense that it would be featureless, as if robbed of details that form an individual by their wicked and dark forces. In what way do you suppose? Well, if you ask me, and take what I say with a grain of salt, I notice so very little, therefore, it's just another item to place on the vast heap of all the weird and eerie events that transpires here. Was it a walk-in for skin? I'm unsure. Do I think it was either demonic or in some other sense supernatural? Indeed, I think that. I'm writing from a dreadful situation I went through in late last year. Last winter seems like a century ago today, a world long before COVID and social separation, like many reading or listening to this. Currently, before all of this happened, I was a waitress located in Alabama. I am 34 years old. Originally from the East Coast, I recently relocated here since that is the location of my husband's farm. Living on a farm and juggling motherhood has made life not always simple. Still, I work evenings, that is, at least I did, and the evenings, as you can see, were quiet. It was around midnight, and although we are open 24 hours a day, there was another female set to be in any minute to allow me go home and finish my shift. I was so applying some lipstick with a small mirror in our rear kitchen. We were packing our lunches for the next day even now. I thus made the decision to walk outside to the rear alley and apply my lipstick correctly using one of the cars. Among the cooks was this one.
I didn't feel strange about it, as he and I were great friends and very close.
My face felt weird already, as if I had blotched it. Being a pretty proud person, I won't be looking like a tramp. I should slip outside real fast and grab a quick cigarette before I start anything, especially leave for my shift. After all, my shift was somewhat demanding to start with. To put it mildly, I had a trucker visit and attempt to be stressful. It was quite entertaining when a trucker came in trying to grope me from behind. He produced a decent slap across his cheek at last. Still, it is not the story I am here to share.
I left, smoked, or at least tried to light, a cigarette, and as soon as I pulled out my phone, I started to feel strange.
I quickly flipped my phone to direct the screen brightness into the night. When two big, what I can only characterize as brilliant spheres of light, what I can make out to be eyes, displayed from the reflection of the screen. Though everything was wrong, this was some form of animal, some sort of monster. Other than the bright orange orb seated in it, the head resembled that of a skull with big projecting eye sockets that seemed vacant and dead. It appeared to be terrible, though it was on 4 legs, like an animal. Whatever I was looking at was tall. I started to hear whispers in that very instant, nearly like a diabolical chanting. Indeed. I went back inside right away before I could do anything, not sure what else to call it. But as I gazed at it, it started to gently slink in my direction before I fled inside.
Once more, I paid it no thought at all.
I must have not even stopped because I still knew where I was, since when I returned in the kitchen, I still had my lit cigarette in my hand. My friend's cook screamed at me, asking me why I was strolling in the kitchen carrying a lit cigarette and knowing I should not be smoking indoors. I felt nauseous, completely appalled. Coming over to console me, he could sense something was off. I started crying and stating that terrible things were out there. Stuck his head out the door, glanced about, came back in and said, "I didn't see anything wrong. I'm not sure what you've seen. Are you sure you're feeling okay?" He looked at me perplexed and bewildered. I nodded, and he said I needed to head home. He would assist cover me. Of course, traffic was really dead, as I mentioned, and the girl covering my shift was just about here any minute, so it wasn't really important. I'm not sure what I observed. Nice, but it surely caused me to rethink my values and those. One exists a concept known as hell.
To view the Beta Takawin Cliff House, a Navajo ruin etched on solid rock.
We were showing up to explore the ruins, specifically in violation of rules allowing us not to. We had everything, including backup plans should we be caught. Long story short, we were able to independently tour the several abandoned homes. I became ecstatic and contacted my fiancé when I discovered a chamber connected to more rooms that descended farther down into the rock. She was outdoors and I could hear her feet moving.
She wasn't responding to me, and if I ever get frustrated, it usually comes from discovering something I would like to show her.
As I approached the exit, I started to head outside and observed something. My fiancé's feet were shuffling from deeper inside the inside, not from outside. I recall another realization to drying my mouth. The footsteps were squarely aimed at me, looking over my shoulder. Once, and I was walking straight forward. Once and only once, I glanced over my shoulder. Another glance, and my sanity might have dropped away. There wouldn't have been much to see without the bared teeth and the eyes. It would have just been a black shadow sporting an animal fur so ancient that it had faded into leather. A wrecked headpiece of some kind was on its head and nearly covered two eyes with the unfocused gaze of a dead. Whatever it was meant to be human, but humans lack fangs, as long as that did, or claws like this beast possessed. You could feel it in your sternum. Neither do people have a roar strong enough to rock your whole ribcage. It yelled something at me.
Though I'm not sure what it stated, I would subsequently translate it as trespasser.
Though I know that sounds very cliched, I am reporting exactly what happened. I knew it was demonic in nature. This did not necessarily shout in a physical sense. The way this was expressed, the way it shouted, was psychic. When I found my fiancée, she asked me what had occurred and said how horrible I looked. I told her I believed I had come into an ancient demonic guardian, a skinwalker, some type of runoff. Then, you know what? I don't even believe my own narrative. More and more I tell it, especially now that I have spelled it all out. I saw The Thing back in January 1997, right back. Though I'm not sure exactly what you would name it, it horrified me, whatever it was. Like I just told you, it was unlike anything I could ever dream of or understand my brain could allow me to explain. I was a far busier man with a younger family running about back then.
It was my wife's 41st at the time, and we had a wonderful meal late evening.
At the time, we lived outside of Maine. We were traveling home on a road lined on both sides with a lot of woodland. I'm referring especially about severely thick woodlands. After catching up with all of her family, my wife was rather drunk, so the kids were at home with my mother, so I basically was just listening to the radio, but every time I looked over, I could see something white to my side, as if it was a white horse or something in the forest, every time I looked over. One thing caught my eye, and I came across nothing. I wasn't sure what it was. Something caught my eye. I realized I had been driving too much and ought to, most likely, stop for coffee or something else at the next stop. Though I was very weary, I kept pulling my hair into my eyes, trying to concentrate on the road, watching my wife sleep with her head against the window, but I can close my eyes for long. Before me, a white skeleton of a huge leopard. I'm not sure another way to phrase that.
It seemed odd. On all fours, this thing shot across the road in front of me.
About 100 yards, I would think.
I tried to use my arm against my wife's stomach to stop her from jolting forward and pressed on the brakes.
The headlights lit whatever this object was as the car halted with the engine still running. With a big hump on its back arched and its spine stuck out, almost like a hyena's in terms of length. Imagine a disfigured, skinned, alive creature to help me to explain it. I'm not sure what it was, but the strong feeling of death took over me. I have never considered such thing as a living entity. It seemed dead, as though it were resurrected. That's why I think this sprang from hell's depths. Another description for it is absent. None of any animal resembles this. My wife woke up right away, and this sobered her really fast. For a time, she was silent. Then she screamed and flung her face into my lap, as if it would be a safe place. Since it was more on my side of the road and there was nobody else I could see, I instantly felt my adrenaline go from 0 to 100 in that very moment and slammed on the ignition, flying towards the creature in hopes to zoom right around it and get out of there. Well, I made it. Actually, it darted off the road into part of the forest or the ditch to the right of the road just as I dove toward the monster and went around it. My nerves were, I was most likely doing 20 or 30 miles an hour over the speed limit. The rest, I was fairly shot. Actually, I was not pulled over, a miracle of God only. Hands down, I would have gotten slapped with a speeding penalty. Regarding handling a situation like this, I wasn't really sure. I was a jertly talk to. I didn't even bother since I knew approaching the cops would lead nowhere. Nevertheless, that period has since gone by and my wife died from breast cancer in 2010. But one of our most recent talks, when she looked at me with one of the most strong expressions on her face, she still told me she thought about that thing and feared it would return for us or our children. In my worst of emotions, I understood what she meant, since for years I attempted to hide that terrible incident, but it haunts us no matter how much we try to ignore. Whatever the demon was, she terrified that this entity would come to take her soul upon death. That this creature would come to claim her soul following death. I believe that what we observed that day was absolutely demonic, hence I am sending you my experience. It could not have been any human or another creature of this planet in no sense, shape, or form. You know as well as anyone that a lot of things exist that defies explanation. I raise hens out here in one of the most friendly areas of Arizona's wilderness, as what I have to tell you really fits that category. I feel that my life's background is not very pertinent to what I have to say, hence I am not going to go into great detail about it. Still, chickens hardly need all that much consolation. They are pleased if you provide them seed and drink as well as somewhere to run. In truth, I built my coop as safe as a prison and only a desperate fox or anything would try to enter. I've gone years without any problems with any predators. Something started invading my chickens without compromising the coop. It was doing it continuously, whatever it was, as if I had set up some kind of chicken vending machine out here in the bush. Since I had no such business, I installed a trail camera to keep an eye on the coop at night. Though cameras cannot lie, my eyes struggled to accept what they saw. The first few nights went fine, but then I captured good footage of the outline of a man with sloped shoulders approaching the coop, and the birds started to become agitated, like they knew who this was, and it wasn't good. Without leaving any blood or harming the fence, or really anything, I questioned how this guy could be so good at getting to my chicks. When the man, what seemed to have melted down into the form of a snake, virtually slithered its way into the coop, past all boundaries, without upsetting anything but the hens, I knew my response. This big snake looked to be that of a cobra, the closest match I could find, and seemed to be that. Apparently aiming to silence the battle, it's latched down on a hen head first and slithered back out. The edge, it almost looked to kind of shape back into what a crouched guy would be. And I headed off with my hen at the neck. Although I'm not new to campfire stories, I have only heard them. Neither have I seen one. That sight set up a fresh, difficultly managed fear for me. Pound for pound, that cop was very likely more safe than my house. And here on video, I noticed a shape-altering phenomenon. Whatever this was able to pass in and out with flawless silence. What if it chose to come for me after the last chickens vanished? Did I come into one of those Navajo witches that evolved into monsters? Otherwise, is this something else totally? Whatever the number was, like a man covered in animal pelts, or what I can only best characterize as animal pelts, I saw my first and only skinwalker in July 2004 close to Gallup, New Mexico. I used to say before this, I will believe it when I see it. Well, right now, I am a believer. Neither human nor animal. What I observed was not whole either. I was with my 10-year-old kid and had just finished cleaning. I was moving. We had called it a night and were on our way to our new residence. I watched a figure go from behind my neighbor's car to a nearby tree between our flats as we left the front door. It moved fast, but not fast enough to evade the light from a nearby lamppost in the porch lighting. It lacked red blazing eyes, snarling teeth, or a horrible smell. It neither came toward nor looked at me. It moved as though it sought to hide from view. Though I did not turn back to thoroughly examine it, I was within 15 feet of it. Not cartoonish, what I observed was a wolf-like animal that sort of matched the beast in Beauty and the Beast. Its brown fur covered it totally. It seemed to be a quite big wolf, not a pelt. Apart from its hind leg walking, it lacked any human characteristics. It crawled behind the tree as we got into her car. I asked my son when we arrived, "Did you see that?" Fortunately, he had it, he added. My brother-in-law argues that I would never have seen it, hence it was not a skinwalker. I can still clearly see what it looked like, know they exist, and pray I never come across one ever again. I resided in a run-down, battered trailer park in New Mexico several years ago, roughly 2003 to 2009. Its population lacked the best of standards. Many of my neighbors were actually scumbags, and when I mean scumbags, I mean simply unpleasant, terrible individuals. Individuals who would exploit the system, pilfers, simply slime of people. Though I dislike talking down on people, these were simply nasty, terrible people, as I mentioned. I regretfully cannot say much better for myself during that period. I also fit perfectly in with all the rest, but I was going through a fairly bad drug addiction and a very poisonous relationship. I was freed from that and developed faith in Jesus only around 2009. I have totally turned my life around since then and now serve the light. I'm writing to you because during my 5 or 6 years there, I saw creatures, and no, these were not drug-induced hallucinations. Though I was on medicines, they were not the type that cause hallucinations. Whichever this was, I had seen it. My ex now, or my girlfriend at the time, had also seen it. But they always appeared to drift toward the far end of the trailer park where this elderly Navajo woman used to reside. There I always felt the creeps starting to flow. She actually engaged in black magic, was quite interested in occult and witchcraft. I just saw her a few times, but even her face, her eyes sunken in. She gave the appearance of death, though I know enough that I have seen the trinkets she had around her trailer, the things she practiced. I know nothing about Navajo tradition, nor occultism, or really witchcraft. It was sufficient to tell me her type of person. Her trailer's frowns had this sinister quality all about them, like you simply had the heebie-jeebies walking by it. And occasionally, at night, peering from her window, we can see these horrible, human-like forms marching from the desert toward her trailer, surrounding. It was just horrible. It seems as though we were witnessing wolf-like creatures or werewolf outlines. Not even sure how I would characterize it. She is Navajo, hence does it indicate she controlled these things? Again, I don't really know anything about Navajo culture or what magic they practice, but knowing what I'm knowing spiritually, I feel today that it had to be a major component in what she accomplished and how she did it. Sure, I'm alone here. I live off of my own land and forbid anyone from visiting it. Apologies. Nevertheless, that is simply how it is. Though it's my territory, my laws, it may be OCD or something else. Thinking that someone was sure looking for a fight one night, I got up. Something moving close to the house triggered off the automatic light, and nothing else sets the light unless something tall enough and big. So I was up and preparing my shotgun to obtain an explanation when that light came into my eyes. I did laps about my house, but found nothing. Looking overhead, I spotted something large, like a buzzard, drifting very leisurely, like around the moon. But that was it. That night there was hardly any animal presence, and no people for sure. I just wrote it off as a glitch of some sort and returned to bed. That light 2 or 3 more times woke me before sunup, and yeah, I was hot about it. I was stomping the ground and screamed. It was not funny. Someone was teasing me. For the lifetime, I could not find where they were hiding. I had scarcely any trees, and none of them were tall enough to hide behind. 3 nights it did in a fit of wrath, and the body fell tumbling down from the heavens. Rather than crash landing, it changed into something resembling a human being with Indian-style feathered headpiece. The eyes radiated, and I had never seen anything like before. I could tell since I observed laughter and insanity. It charged me, and I aimed with the other barrel. Opening my eyes, feathers were floating down, and I heard an odd noise, like laughter or howling, like something you would find out of a mental asylum nut house. Am I dreaming, or is this actual? Is what I am handling supernatural? I'm not even sure. Anyway, I thought I would check if my story would be suitable, if anything, for you after learning my grandson was listening to your show. Are you able to provide responses? Alternatively, am I simply a total nut experiencing mental collapse? I struggle to even believe and accept myself without telling myself that this didn't happen, as what I'm going through just feels so far-fetched and unreal. Is this consistent? I live in southern Colorado, and long ago I worked on a project that sent me around 2 months of travel to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Long story short, but for reasons I not particularly desire to investigate, particularly since it's been decades at this point. After just 3 weeks, I was let go from my work and forced to return home. To get back, I was left with an over 7-hour drive to finish. I didn't give much thought to it at the moment. My path would pass across the Navajo area. Though during the day, I had gone past it before without problems. By the time I arrived, I had been driving for some hours and truly quite needed to use the restroom. Nevertheless, I couldn't manage to find any kind of petrol station, no matter how hard I searched. For some background, this occurred prior to cell phones. Hence, I avoided even GPS, thus I didn't had except an outmoded driving on. I decided I could just pull up close, ask the kind people for directions to the closest petrol station, find out who that was, then head off. When I got there, though, I couldn't find anyone. It was much more confusing as the fire was still blazing fiercely. As soon as they noticed my car, it seemed as though the people decided they wanted to go. About the shrubs a few feet away from me, I heard something moving, then out emerged a wild sheep. Not too long later, a coyote followed. Given their different predator targets, I couldn't see how the two creatures could coexist amiably. They too behaved strangely. They were very still and fixed on me, their eyes shining from the fire. I just waved a little to try and show that I was pleasant and inquired playfully, where did the people go? I figured that given the sheep and coyote were hanging out together, it was reasonable, since it's not entirely unheard of, for people to trap coyote pups and domesticate them. But at that, I observed something. Quite mistaken on these two creatures. These two animals clearly had something horribly wrong about them. Their torsos were too short and wide to make sense for either species, and they were unusually tall, their limbs reminding me of tree branches. The more I looked at and researched these species, the negative emotions started to surface. I turned away slowly, and with each step I winced. They looked to be crawling toward me, almost as if a cat preparing to attack. Then one of them let out an awful scream, and the flames, all in one, blew out like it were just a candle. Once I made my way in, they chased after me, being rather swift to come behind me, and smashed against the door, just barely missing their chance to enter. I yelled for my life and rushed back towards my car. I flew off down the road, the sound of my tires screaming over the heavens, yet I dared not turn around. I stopped only when I at last came upon a gas station, Lulula, using the chance to decompress and at last eat something. Still nervous though, I left there as quickly as I could. I slumped on my couch when I at last got home. The next morning when I got in my car, I saw human handprints on the glass. It only then dawned upon me that I passed through the native reservation. I still think about this event from time to time, and I'm still relatively close to where it happened, so sometimes I have to drive through the area. However, if it's after dark, I don't dare do it. I just take the long way and go around the region. I'm honestly not ever up for having another experience like that again. That was more than enough for me. I have a very close mate of mine that just celebrated his 18th birthday just a few weeks back. And yes, we had a safe social distance birthday party, so to speak, but we had a very dreadful experience. I'd gone back with him to have a fag, and for those that are in America, that means a cigarette, so don't take that the wrong way. He lives out in a village, or I guess in the middle of nowhere if you were to put this into American terms. So we're talking desolate, nowhere, surrounded by woods. And his village is very tiny with not a lot of people around, especially out during the nighttime. But when we stepped out, this thing came out of the woods. I don't know how to describe it. It was like a demon, or or something. It had weird-looking eyes, a long white body. It was almost skeletal, is the best way I can describe its details. It kind of seemed slimy, but completely hairless. Its face nearly resembled a skeletal crocodile, and its eyes were large and yellow. My friend and I were frozen in fear. Immediately, I thought I should pull my phone out to try and get a picture of this thing. I mean, can you imagine the Snapchat prompt? But then I thought, who would believe me? Everybody would just laugh at me and tell me, great costume. Ugh, maybe the drink I was having was spiked. This thing noticed us and began hissing and groveling and pressing its slimy body, hissing and groveling and pressing its slimy body against the ground, coming towards us. I was terrified, and so was my mate. This was like some sci-fi genetic experiment or something gone wrong. I wasn't quite sure what I was seeing or but this was something terrible, something gruesome. It reminded us that something the government would try and cover up, and ever since I saw this thing, I have had the most bizarre nightmares. So, for whatever reason, it didn't pursue us, attack us, or try to kill us. After hissing at us, it quickly, as if being alerted to something, fled back into the woods where it came from. I know that sounds cliche, but somehow I believe that was sparing us. Why? I don't know. We ran back inside, and that pretty much killed the vibe of our small party. I'm not really sure how to handle this new reality, considering I've always been the type of person to make fun of people for believing fairy tales, dragons, and all that nonsense, and now I've been proven that something other than this exists. My girlfriend even keeps asking me what's wrong, and that I need to go to the doctor. It's really affected me. I often think now that I have the virus too because I break out in cold sweats. Or, maybe it's just something that I saw changed me, taking me out of my reality and reminded me that there are other things in the universe that I don't understand, or perhaps want to understand. I hope that in writing this, other people will perhaps hear me and come forward. That was bad, man. It still does, and cause nightmares. My only cover was the gym where I work. I have no friends or relatives to crash with. After leaving my shift, I used to spend nights in the rear rooms, as it's open 24/7. But I was finally caught and threatened to be let go should I do it once more, so leaving me nowhere to call home. I was quite desperate as I couldn't even afford a motel. About a week ago, I hunkered down in the neighboring woods near my employment with just minimal supplies. I chose them because of their remoteness as much as their proximity. Given that deep forest is somewhat rare where I reside, the Southwest US, I thought of myself at the time as rather lucky. I wanted nothing that little I had to be taken from. The first few nights went without any problems, actually. But lately I woke up to the sounds of something moving around me. I tried to identify what it was, but all I could actually see in front of me, the low buzzing lights from the rear of the gym, some 100 feet away from where I was sitting. From behind me, what I was hearing felt to be approaching. Though I wasn't sure which one to be more anxious about, I couldn't tell whether it was human or animal. Pulling out my terrible burner phone, I looked at the time, almost 3 a.m. Turning my phone around, I tried to see what was there, but nothing by shining it into the surrounding trees. Not knowing what else to do, I assembled everything I owned and laid on top of it just in case someone wanted to steal it. Though not quite pleasant, neither was sleeping in the forest. Before leaving for work yesterday morning, I hid my belongings as best of my ability. When I got back to my belongings, it was unaltered. Not long after setting up camp for the evening, I fell off into a dream world. It looked to be the same as yesterday night. Once more, I opened my phone. Once more in the morning at 3, I realized this would send me crazy. I thus looked around once more using the light of my phone, got off from my covers and weaved somewhat among the trees. Eventually, the light fell on something. It seemed to be a strange mix of both human and animal, neither of which was natural. Oddly enough, it likewise appeared to be both living and dead. Then I came to find that it was really a crouched-over human sporting what looked to be a bobcat's pelts. I avoided trying to chat to them. I barely let out a scream. I merely turned around and sprinted back inside the gym. When a coworker questioned what was going on, I answered him. Though he didn't really seem to grasp, he was polite enough to let me spend the night sleeping in the building and agreed not to notify our manager, which leads us to today. From here, I'm not clear what to do. I hoped that if I just leave the individual alone, they would leave me alone too. Part of me is too tired to try to bother to move again. Like the bobcat they were sporting on their rear, Another aspect of my anxiety is that it's just a matter of time before I'm skinned. I know I'll decide finally, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Before I mention, I would merely want you to keep my credentials anonymous, even with this knowledge. I'm going to merely ask that you keep my credentials private for my security and for my safety before I disclose you this information, as should my name be revealed, I would not even want to consider the consequences. I used to work with the Albuquerque police, not really for them, but rather alongside them. Once more, it's difficult to explain. However, that might be better. In any case, I know people discuss skinwalkers and them not being genuine, but there is more going on in the desert than one would think. Many of my friends who are police actually have horrific tales to tell, many of them inexplicable and paranormal. Years ago, in 2004, there was a case involving a man allegedly killing his girlfriend. He says, presumably going insane following an incident and under interrogation, that a skinwalker had abducted his lover and skinned her, then worn her skin. Now, I'm not sure if that isn't insane. Although some of the folks we have seen on meth and LSD may create more logical, credible narratives, his story never changed. His specifics, everything checked out, making it more horrific. He said he and his girlfriend visited various Navajo flea markets where she questioned about it and showed several of the merchants images of the skinwalkers. Her was, but consequences evidently, and somehow going. She questioned about it using what he mentioned. She was presumably facing consequences and somehow, following what he suggested, drew a skinwalker who had shown up missing. Now, I'm not sure if I accept all of that, but I think he had something to do with her murder and disappearance. Next thing you know, an officer had captured him at a nearby abandoned gas station, far out of town, supposedly sporting her skin, worn like a suit, like it had been carved off her body. I understand it to be quite ugly and terrible. He was arrested right away and thoroughly questioned about where he had buried the rest of her body. He stayed to tell his version of events and omitted mentioning where. Again, wild events occur out here. Who knows if he was possessed, or maybe he was just high as a kite. His girlfriend was a skinwalker, or if skinwalkers acquired her? This is a quite normal 20-year-old child with a decent record who hardly engaged in any trouble. Who then truly knows? Another riddle among the paranormal data is. Though I wouldn't want to share too much, I thought you would find this intriguing. Remain safe. Please refrain from hate me should this not be the skinwalker I refer to. If this isn't the skinwalker, loathe me. Not quite sure, this encounter has truly terrified me and haunts me ever since. I apologize if this is a little long. I'm so afraid someone I know will see it, and I want not to be criticized. Anyway, my dad resides in Spain, roughly 1 hour from Barcelona. It's right close to the shore, not overly busy. Many mountains feature tiny towns. My dad resides in a modest apartment building with a mountain on one side of the pool. Naturally, my room is the only one facing the mountain when I visit him, among other flats. The blinds fail, hence I prefer to sleep with a totally dark view into the mountain or woodland region. I thus go to sleep, covering the window with a blanket. The blanket has little holes on its edges. The kitchen also faces mountain direction. Since my dad was picking me up, one day when we were getting home from the airport, he went to the kitchen to grab a drink. When I went to my room to unload, my dad abruptly yells for me to come to the kitchen and I quickly go. I'm not sure exactly, but right below our window seems to be a wild boar. Plants and tree leaves somewhat obscure it, but we can see what appears to be a large pig, except it is far more hairy. Then, my dad says it's a very big sausage, but it becomes terrified and bolts. I went to the kitchen later that evening to grab a late-night snack. Dad already? Nodding off in the room beside mine, I glimpsed the window to look to see whether the room next to mine is asleep. Though the sausage he tossed before is gone, I peep out the window to check for a boar, which isn't there. Except it's on aliens? The high grass and plants that were there before have been crushed to create a circle, sort of like field marks by aliens. I then returned to my room to lay my carpet across my window. Hearing a gentle knock on the glass, my back is toward the window to grab the blanket. Pitch black, but I swing fast to face the window. I am quite paranoid and have read thousands of eerie tales. I am not one of those folks who would go explore. So I toss the blanket over the window right away and get to bed. 2 hours later when I wake up, someone is crying. Like a puppy whining, it sounds. I figure it's one of my neighbor's 3 dogs, since he has 3. I briefly look about the room. Nothing unusual, yet I still have this, nothing unusual, but I still, this strange way. Look toward the window, and still, nothing strange. But then that is until I lie down once more, facing the window, and glance out one of the little holes to see 2 eyes squarely staring at me. I nope out of there, then dash to the other balcony toward the beach, away from the mountainside. I have some cool air and just unwind a little before curling up on the couch to fall asleep. With the couch facing the kitchen, I find myself staring out the window. Not anything, though I won't sleep the rest of the night. I somewhat relax and close my eyes. My dad wakes me up following morning and questions why I'm sleeping on the couch. I stammered something about being afraid, and the conversation gently stops. We plan to go hiking with some pals. Among the pals is a 16-year-old lad who is a total D-bag and constantly acts rather rudely and aggressively. Last night's event makes me even hesitant to want to travel, but my dad pushes me and I find myself trailing as the last one in the rear. We've been walking for a few hours when I start to become nervous. We'll call the lad my age John. He observes and approaches me. John wants to know whether I'm all right. I say sure. Last night, he reports, he had the strangest encounter. They share the same apartment, and his room faces the mountains as well. He informed me. Behind the scenes. Something in the form of a human, somewhat taller, standing on the balcony I have in front of my room, from where you could immediately view my window into my room. I pause. My blood freezes. As I mentioned, I am somewhat paranoid and almost started weeping. It wouldn't be the first time, hence I wonder whether he is joking me. Though he's irritating, he swears, at least. He's trustworthy, at least. I can tell when he's lying. He knows how paranoid I am. I choose to share with him my experience. He spends over 10 minutes just cussing and repeating things like, wow, shut down, no way. We are far behind, and I can hardly see our group anymore. There's nothing else we could do, so we decide to walk back and phone my dad when we get home, since we would rather not get lost. I don't know this mountain. It's dark walking back, and right now I'm afraid. He tells me everything is fine, and I see he has transformed from his douchey behavior to a far more sobering one. I turn around to face something tall that I suddenly spot walking right next to us. I'm getting chills even writing this. Words cannot even capture what I observed. The beast bolted right away, although I glimpsed a small bit into the bush. Hunched over, looked to be a 6-foot-tall human-looking creature covered with light-haired all-over body. Short hands. It made me terrified. Though I realize my description is horrible, what I observed is what I found. We run the rest of the half hour from our house. I now instantly phone my dad to let him know what we saw. Saying things like, "It's only your imagination," helps him to cool me down, as they were wondering where we were. One of them had a panic attack, so they sent 2 men back. Later on, my dad told me he experienced one as he observed what we saw. But my paranoia at the time prevented my dad from telling me. We watched for the 2 men to return. We locked. All the windows and doors are closed, and the lights are off. Thus, we settled down to watch a movie. John now is really kind and helps me to relax. The 2 men hold the keys, so I persuade him not to open the door even if we hear a knock at it. After 2 straight minutes of knocking, the sound is intolerable and the knocking intenses. John then lets in the door. Hiding, I stood behind the door to my room. John exclaims, "There's nothing," and I feel really shivers. I move toward the window and rip the cover off, thinking someone is watching. And the only thing separating us is glass, which you could readily break and simply stroll in from standing on the balcony. John bursts, running to get me to leave the window, but I'm paralyzed and crying, almost peeing my pants. Then the thing yells an unnatural scream. It sounded to me as fingers on a chalkboard. It leaps over the balcony, then vanishes. Less than 5 seconds saw all of this occur. John swears he didn't see anything, even though I could tell he's lying and he doesn't want anyone to know what he saw, which just makes me appear like a freak. I still don't know what I saw. When my dad and the group get home, I am curled in John's arms, crying furiously. Turns out the 2 men had simply strolled to the beach to grab beer, hoping to soothe the one experiencing a panic attack. When I had to define it, the first thing that came to me was not what I observed: a skinwalker. If I had to choose, it would be a skinwalker, that is the werewolf from Harry Potter, or the teacher turns out to be a hairless werewolf. Not stating exactly why she couldn't, my dad's girlfriend walked out a few months later declaring she couldn't live there anymore. I apologize for the lengthy post, but I'm not sure exactly what this could be. I could be mistaken. I want to say skinwalker. You serve as the judge.